This lesson is about formulas. This is section 2.2 in your textbook. The essential question is, how do you solve a formula for a specified variable, and how do you use formulas to solve problems? So what exactly is a formula? Well, one definition might be, a formula is an equation in which variables are used to describe a relationship. Okay? Two examples of formulas might be d is equal to rt, where that is distance is equal to rate times time, or the area of a rectangle is equal to length times width. So, how do we go about solving a formula for a specified variable? Well, let's start by looking at this formula right here, d equals rt. Let's say I wanted to solve that for r, which is rate, or people might refer to it as speed. Basically, what you need to do is transform that formula so that all terms containing the specified variable are on one side of the equation, and all terms without that variable are on the other side. So initially what I need to do here is I need to take and get the r by itself and move the t over to the same side as d. So let's start with the basic formula of d equals rt. Well, I want to get rid of the t and get it over to the other side. So one thing I can do is, if I divide the right side by t, I've got t over t, which is 1, so that gets rid of it from the right side. But remember, whatever I do to the right side, I must do to the left side. So therefore, I've got d over t. So if I look at this and realize that the t's on the right cancel, I end up with r is simply equal to d divided by t, or rate is equal to distance divided by time. So let's look at another example here. P is equal to 2L plus 2W. This is the formula for the perimeter of a rectangle. Perimeter is equal to twice the length plus twice the width. Now, let's assume that I want to solve for W. So I want to get everything over on the left except the W term. So what am I going to do first? Well, the first thing we want to do is get rid of the 2L from the right side. So I'm going to say minus 2L on the right, because 2L minus 2L will be 0. But again, whatever I do on the right, I have to do on the left. So what does that give me? That simply gives me P minus 2L is equal to 2W. Well, we're almost there, but on the right, we have 2W instead of W, so I want to get rid of that too. So I'm going to simply divide the right side by 2. That means I have to divide the left side by 2 as well. So my final, since these 2's cancel, my final result is that W, or the width of a rectangle, is equal to the perimeter minus 2 times the length divided by 2. Now let's look at another example. Now the previous formula that I gave you, P is equal to 2L plus 2W, or the perimeter of a rectangle, could also have been written P is equal to 2 times the sum of L plus W. Well, let's say I again wanted to solve for W, all right? So what am I going to do first? Okay, I have to take and get rid of what's outside the parentheses first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by 2, divide the right by 2, divide the left by 2, all right? The right 2's cancel, and I'm left with P over 2 is equal to L plus W. All right? So now, as I say, I'm trying to solve for W, okay? So I want W by itself. So I'm going to subtract L from the right to get rid of the L on the right, and that means I have to subtract L from the left, which is going to give me my final answer of P over 2 minus L is equal to W. Now this looks a little different, but it is the equivalent expression to what we did before. Simply by, if I multiply the L by 2 over 2, I will get the same expression as I had before of P minus 2L over 2. Now let's see how we can use formulas to solve problems. So let's look at this word problem. Janet found that it took her 3/4 of an hour each day to drive a distance of 15 miles to work. What was her speed? Okay, we're given time, we're given distance, we're asked to find speed, or remember, we sometimes referred to as rate. Well, I know there is a formula, and I know that formula says that distance is equal to rate times time. And earlier in this lesson, we solved for rate and found that rate was equal to distance divided by time. Well, we know the distance is 15. We know that the time is, and let me put units here, 15 miles. And we know the time is 3/4 of an hour. Well, if you remember the rule for division of fractions, this is simply equal to 15 over 1 divided by 3 over 4, but that's the same thing as multiplied times 4 over 3. And I know that 3 goes into 15 5 times, so our rate is equal to 5 times 4, or 20. And what are our units? Miles per hour. So here's a word problem where we've used the formula to solve it. Now, one last type of problem we're going to talk about is a percent problem. How do we deal with a percent problem? Okay? Now, a percent is per 100. So, for example, if I had, let's say, 1%, that's 1 over 100. Okay? So another way of looking at it is, we could say that the partial amount divided by the whole amount is equal to the percent, but represented as a decimal. So whatever I'd get as the partial over the whole, I would have to multiply it by 100 to actually get the percent. So let me give you an example here. So our example might read like this. A 50-liter mixture of acid and water contains 10 liters of acid. What is the percent of acid in the mixture? Well, what's the partial amount we're talking about in this case? The partial amount that we're talking about in this case is simply 10, because that's 10 liters of acid. And the whole amount is 50 liters of the mixture. Well, 10 over 50 is simply 0.20. But remember, we said that was the percent represented as a decimal. So in order to get this as a percent, I must multiply this times 100. So if I multiply this times 100, I'll come up with my answer, which is 20% acid.